Welcome, everybody, and welcome to the Road to Retail podcast, where we share and interview our friends and colleagues within the CPG industry. And today with me, I've got our guest co-host. You might recognize her, Krista Anderson. She was on our last podcast with Maya French. And welcome, Krista, and welcome our audience today on this very interesting topic that we're going to talk about. And I think it's near and dear to a lot of small emerging brands today. And the topic we're going to talk about is deductions, and specifically with distributors. And I'll let Greg and Tanay introduce themselves here in a minute. But Krista, tell our audience just a little bit about you.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Tracy, for having me back on the Road to Retail podcast. I'm Krista Anderson, founder and CEO of S-Star, an international natural food brokerage company with offices based in the US and France. And our mission is to help create a preventative healthcare system by making healthy foods accessible to people across the country. And I'm also the author of Claim Your Healing and Living My Best Life in the South of France.
Awesome. Thanks again, Krista, for joining us. I'm Tracy Priest. I'm the co-founder of Road to Retail. I've been in consumer packaged goods for 30 years. In commercial operations, in marketing, trade marketing, sales, multiple functions. And we really started the Road to Retail to really help small emerging brands navigate getting into retail as well as e-commerce. And on our podcast, as I mentioned, we interview friends and colleagues, founders of brands, as well as service providers and our colleagues. And today I'm happy to have my friends, Greg Esslinger and Tanay, on to talk about deductions. So Greg and Tanay, why don't you tell our audience just a little bit about you, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Sure. Thanks, Tracy. Thanks for having us on. And like Tracy said, my name is Greg Esslinger. I've got about 15 years in CPG. Worked for about a decade at one of the largest natural distributors, UNFI, in buying and category management. So then I left there about 4.5 years ago and started my company, Natural Food Ally, where I'm the founder, and we pretty much help brands to navigate the natural food channel and avoid deductions and avoid pitfalls all through the way. So, Tanay, go to you.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks so much for having us on. My name is Tanay. I'm co-founder of a software company called Floret that helps CPG brands scale and manage distributor deductions. My own background, I started my career as a consultant, had a chance to work with a number of different CPG brands while I was doing that, and then shifted over into the world of software for quite a bit. Got a sense of sort of the potential and possibilities there. And then in 2022, started building the software company Floret that, we think is really going to be helpful for brands as they try and manage not only distributor deductions, but all of the other different pieces of information that they deal with over the course of running their business. So excited to be here talking about a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts, whether we like it or not.
Absolutely. And I think it's near and dear to a lot of small emerging brands who are struggling with deduction management. And that's why we wanted to have, Tanay and Greg on today, is to really just talk about this topic and educate our audience about, about deductions and how to handle them and the types of deductions. So we're going to go ahead and kind of hop right in here and start our discussion. So Krista, why don't you kick us off with our first question to the guys?
I guess start us off with, kind of people that are new into this industry, but what would you say the definition of a distributor deduction is?
Sure. Yeah. Distributor deductions, I think the most helpful way to think about them, because there are so many different types, they refer to the general body of costs that brands incur when they're trying to do business with distributors, passing it on to retailers. So this can be everything from the costs that distributors themselves have that are contractually agreed to, for example, associated with freight and distribution of the actual product. But these can also be the pass-through deductions that retailers actually charge for doing the services that they provide. helping with merchandising, with various discounts that are passed on, et cetera. And so for brands, the sum total of deductions that they deal with is, again, not only just what they get from distributors themselves, but also everything coming through from a retailer. And these tend to be deducted off of the invoices and checks that brands receive. So part of the confusion here a lot of the time is that brands may sell a considerable amount of product to a distributor, but after deductions, what they see is a much smaller total because of all the different transactions that happen between a brand selling a product and actually that product coming through.
Yeah.
Very good. Greg, you want to add something there?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that Tanay kind of went through a few list of deduction, like the different kinds, and I just figured I'd jump in there and just say, there's all sorts of different kinds of deductions that can hit you, and it's not just what the retailers do. It's all the marketing spend that you're doing with your distributor. It's your spoils. It's your reclamation fees, chargebacks for short ships, or if you're doing different promotions, they're going to charge you back for that. All sorts of late delivery fines, slotting fees. It's a whole gamut, and anything can hit your books, and it can be unexpected or expected. It doesn't, it often, the issue with deductions is there's so much that's unexpected.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I was gonna chime in there, and most of the time it is unexpected. And for our small emerging audience to brand audience today, be aware of that. I've experienced it directly with the brands that I work with, and I'll just give you an example where the orders were placed and it was $10,000 worth of product, but they got a check for $2,000, and they didn't understand, why. So that's really the purpose of our chat today, really, is to kind of educate people and the brands that watch our show on what to be, what to watch out for, and at least be aware. And I know that in Krista and I's conversations, because we both work with small brands, this is a hot topic these days.
And
yeah,
to your point, I was just going to say, to your point, Tracy, not knowing what's being deducted is one of the biggest issues, and the distributors just don't make it easy for us when those deductions come through on the check. You have no idea what the codes mean that are put on there, and everybody's kind of just left with their hands up, not understanding what they mean. So it's really imperative that brands search out and look for somebody that can help them, walk through that process.
Absolutely. And Greg, you kind of talked a little bit about the types of deductions, spoils and things like that. Maybe tell our audience also, or Tanay, about the difference between and again, we're talking a lot about distributor deductions, but also, retailers, also big retailers have deductions as well, but we're talking really primarily today about distributors. But tell us maybe a little bit, guys, about the difference between a UNFI and a KHE deduction. What's the difference?
I mean, they both have a lot of the same kind of deductions, right? They almost follow each other's roadmap, or their contracts are very similar when it comes to what they charge for. So generally speaking, you're going to get a lot of the same stuff.
Okay.
You're definitely not gonna, there are a few different deductions here and there based on who their customers are, right? But for the most part, you're going to have the same short ships. You're going to have the same spoils that come through. You're going to have all that same, if you short an OI, both of them are going to try to claw back their money from you. When you have MCBs, they're going to get passed on to you. You're going to have fees for those MCBs. So regardless of UNFI or KHE, you're going to get hit. You're going to get hit with a lot of the same deductions.
Yeah.
All right.
I would say though that there are a couple of small things for brands to keep in mind as nuances across the two distributors. So one of them I'd say is it's extremely important to sort of know as you're working with KHE or UNFI, the relationship you have with your SRM, or what's the other one, Greg?
You're just category manager.
Yeah, your category manager at each of the distributors can tend to work a little bit differently from one another. And then the other is that the dispute period between the different distributors can vary a little bit. And this can be a source of confusion at times for brands that might be used to working with one set of practices as they work with one distributor. And then when they scale over, to working with another distributor, sort of have to get accustomed to a bit of a different process when it comes to actually managing and disputing these deductions. But as Greg said, for the most part, I think the high level policies have kind of converged to a similar place between KHE and UNFI.
So you're saying is the buckets of types of deductions are pretty much the same. Maybe how they do it or the systems might be a little bit different.
Yeah, the systems are quite a bit different because
Yeah.
with UNFI, you've got the deductions coming through. They're all on the page, the check stub, and you don't have any backup for a few days until they actually send it to you, and it's in a PDF. It's very hard to digest and hard to match up your deductions from your check stub with the actual deductions that backup that they've provided, and it's very manual. Whereas at least with KHE, they have a portal where you can go in and you get all your deductions. And if you don't agree with a deduction out of that portal, you can pretty much click dispute and your reason. The problem with KHE is it's a bit of a black hole. Once you do submit that deduction, it's really hard to keep the follow-up going. And on the UNFI side, at least you have an email address that you're kind of going back and forth with. So there's pluses and minuses to both. But at the same time, they don't make it super easy for you. And by design, they don't want to make that process really easy for you. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Krista?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of answered. I just had this thought because I was thinking, with a lot of my brands that I work with, they're really struggling when they get that invoice and they're like, whoa, how am I going to afford to pay this? And so I was curious, how far can you negotiate? Like, can you give any intel behind the scenes? Like, what advice would you give? I mean, these brands they're small, they don't have a ton of investment capital sometimes. And it's like, they're just trying to get their dream out there. And this is the path, this distributor is that path to doing that. And, how do they play that game and win?
Well, I would say, one of the most important things is keeping a really strong relationship with your supplier manager or your category manager. Interact with them as much as you can without being a bother to them, and keep that relationship on good, solid standing. And if you do that, they're going to be much more likely to help you out when it comes to the deduction time. There are different category managers, they're different supplier managers. Each one's different. They're not going to all act the same way. They're not going to give the same leeway for everybody. So it is a bit of luck of the draw of who you receive as your supplier manager, category manager. But that being said, a lot of these deductions, it doesn't really matter. They're pretty black and white. What's in your contract's in your contract, but there are some deductions that there is a little bit more leeway if there's, very situational. So if there's if there's a short shipped PO, as long as you've got the BOL, you can prove that you've got the backup, you can typically get those repaid. If you've got a situation where, service level fees and you've got an extenuating circumstance, they do have the ability to give you some leeway and maybe give you a break on a deduction here or there. And those supplier managers, at least from the UNFI side, I know do have the ability to give you a break, whether it's slotting fees or stuff like that. You just have to really try to maintain that relationship as best you can.
Yeah,
And
I would say that.
Go ahead, Tanay.
Sure. Having sat in on a couple of these meetings that happen between category managers and brands, I think the brands that do the best, especially among the smaller ones, are the ones that come to these meetings from a place of curiosity and just wanting to understand exactly what's in the contract. They do a little bit of homework ahead of time and try to make sense of the deductions, but actually just go to their contact to these companies and say, hey, why did this happen? What can we do to actually avoid some of these operational issues? And what we've seen is that works a lot better than maybe impulsively being a little bit confrontational, which is understandable at times for brands. Maybe you get a little bit of sticker shock seeing exactly how much has been deducted. But ultimately, we found that trying to foster that type of a relationship, in addition to, of course, knowing your contract, you got to know what's in there. You got to make the initial effort, to have that understanding. But beyond that, what we've seen as really successful for brands, again, is just to take, put that best foot forward right away and say, hey, we're trying to learn how we can run a more effective business with you, UNFI or KeHE. Can you help us? I think is a much better way to go about tackling this for brands.
So what I want to recap here, so I understand what you're saying, and I get it. It's about having that relationship as much as you can. And like Greg said, sometimes you can have a really good one, and sometimes people don't want to have that relationship. But the other thing is, I want to point out to our audience, come from a place of, asking good questions, but at the same time, you don't want to be needy where you're calling and emailing every day, because that will also, we've talked about this also, Bruce and I have on other, on our other podcast episodes where, you don't want to be that needy supplier where you're reaching out every day, either by phone or email. Would you?
There's really a balance, Tracy, to walk here. And if you go too far on one end, you're going to turn into that needy supplier. And you got to remember, these category managers, they've got 200 brands that they're dealing with. Are they going to want to help the ones that are, emailing them every 2 seconds? It's sometimes, yeah, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, but not in this situation. I remember plenty of times as a supplier manager pushing those right down to the bottom of my list to respond to, just because I had other more important pressing things than a $100 deduction. And it might not be easy for a brand to hear that, but the reality is it's the truth on their end. It's what they're dealing with. And the new brands, they don't bring in nearly as much revenue for these supplier managers and category managers, which their sole purpose and what they're rated on is how much money they're bringing in for UNFI and KeHE. It's not based off of, having a good relationship with a small brand. That's what the next program's for supplier, for UNFI, so.
Right. That's good. That's good advice. And I'm really glad that our small emerging brand audience hears that from a former, SRM at UNFI. So you talked about some best practice, Tanay and Greg. Tell us a little bit more, maybe a couple more best practices. You talked about, understanding the deductions, having the relationship with your category manager or your SRM, but maybe tell us, both of you, a couple more best practices for, managing these deductions with the distributor.
Yeah, organization. Key. Keep all your BOLs. That's, keep all your backup in one central location so you can get to it quickly. The BOLs is the big piece. Understand your contract. If you are a new brand, hire somebody that knows what is in that contract and what it means. They're hard to read. It's not just the contract. I know with UNFI, they've got the supplier policies that corresponds. It's not in the contract, but you guys still have to go by everything that's in that policy. It's 40 pages long. You need somebody to walk you through that so you understand it, and everybody on your team is on the same page. It's not just the founders, whoever's your co-packer, whoever's in doing your operations or your accounting, or all your warehouse people. Everybody's got to be on the same page and understand, especially your salespeople, right? So that you know that everybody knows that you can only do a 15% or 20% hip pocket deal, or your free fills are only 50%. They're not, you're given half slotting versus a full free fill. All that stuff. You got to be on the same page.
Yeah, great point.
Greg hit on some really big.
Sorry, for one question for our audience that may not know what a BOL is.
Bill of lading.
There you go. I knew that. I just want to make sure our audience does. Sorry, Tanay, go ahead.
No, all good. Yeah, Greg hit on some really great tactics there that, I think all emerging brands should keep in mind. I think there's a couple of themes there in common that I think are really important to emphasize no matter what. and that kind of drive a lot of the behavior at times that leads to all of these distributor deductions. And one of them is just in this macro environment as a brand, the key is to stay default alive. The key is to, grow and scale in a responsible fashion. And so what we see often driving a spate of unexplained distributor deductions can often be the allure of getting into 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 doors without maybe considering the unit economics of all of that. And I think very reasonably folks get a little starstruck about, their beloved brand that they have spent a lot of time growing, but that can often be the thing that leads to the most addition and complexity in deductions. Where things really spiral out of control for brands is not when they're just working with maybe their first larger retailer for the first time with KeHE or UNFI. It's the way that actually multiplies out when you're having to understand all of these different themes and all of these different policies across a really large group of it. So I just want to sort of emphasize that, bringing your team together, making sure that everybody understands how important this issue is and everybody understands how their actions can directly either improve or, make much worse the process of dealing with these deductions. Getting that alignment is so important, because ultimately everyone has to steer in the same direction for this not to be a big problem. It's an expensive industry, and brands are just trying to make it. So we have a lot of empathy for brands. The last thing you want to think about when you're thinking about everything else associated with running your company is like, what is my relationship to this SRM? And all of these other kind of tertiary questions that are outside of your control. And so again, really, what I think the unifying factor across everything Greg has said and what we would like to drive home today is know what's in your contracts, know how it's going to affect your business, and make sure you have a good process in place for driving everything in the same direction.
And not to pick on small emerging brands, but how many small emerging brands actually know what's in those contracts? Or are they just signing it because, like Krista said, they have stars in their eyes? Oh my gosh, I just got into Publix and now I have to, start doing business with KeHE, or I just got into Sprouts, or et cetera, et cetera. And they have stars in their eyes, not really fully understanding the cost of doing business. So I think the key point here, for our audience today is, if you don't understand the contract that you're signing, get some help so that you at least understand. I don't think there's a whole lot of negotiation in those contracts. Guys can maybe chime in on that a little bit, but at least understand what you're signing. And I do think that a lot of brands don't. Krista, what's been your experience on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would also suggest for brands to speak with other brands. What have they experienced, to kind of learn from the others on the path of, to avoid failure or, avoid these types of things. So, I mean, what would you guys say small brands are losing the most money from with deductions?
Sure. Yeah, there are a couple of common buckets where I would say sort of the most surprising and large and like jarring deductions happen to hit small brands, right? The first can be the blanket free fills, right? So when you want to get into as many different retail locations as possible, you may say like, hey, yeah, it's fine, we'll give away free product. But if you're not sort of keeping an eye on maybe where and to what cadence those different free fills are happening, they can really pile up and become expensive and not even really drive your business in that productive of a direction. So again, it's one of those things where it's appealing to grow to, X number of thousand locations, but it comes at a really significant cost, and there might not actually be the bang for your buck there. Another one is shorting distributors during OI periods. So, during those weeks of the year where distributors have the right to order a bunch of product at a discount, that product needs to be made available for them. It's the cost of doing business, and brands that aren't really able to do that get hit with pretty significant penalties. And these systems are even configured at times to keep reordering if the product isn't available during an OI period. So some of these, ludicrous at times in size, right? $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 charges can be the result of OI, OI shorting. And it's not something that's maybe intuitive to brands or something that they think about. It's a little bit buried, in the text. And then the final thing I would highlight, just freight issues, not being on top of reviewing POs, bills of lading, all of the different scattered documents that get generated over the course of your product actually going out to market. And I really want to drive home the importance of this, because there are so many things that brands do that might drive a small amount of ROI, but take a lot of mind share to think about. But if you actually take a little bit of time to review, your freight and your bill of ladings and all of these other pieces of your business, this is something that you could potentially spend a relatively small amount of time thinking about, but drive large amounts of cost savings in your business. If this is something that's a persistent problem and it shows up as you review your deductions, right? You see time and time again, shipments are not arriving where they need to, your 3PLs or your co-packers are not sort of fulfilling their responsibilities. That could be something that you figure out and problem solve in a couple of days that fundamentally changes the unit economics of your business. So I would really, really encourage brands to spend a little bit of time. If they can do it themselves, they should. If they want to speak to somebody that's qualified to kind of think about those matters, it's absolutely worth the money that it costs, I would say, because so much of the shipping and packing and this process is out of your hands, but it's one of the most consequential parts of actually bringing your product to market.
Right.
So what you're saying, Tanay, is that you're charged if you're early and you're charged if you're late. Greg's laughing, but it's true, isn't it? Only if you're on time. Only if you're right on time.
You have to be right on time.
Yep. And if you're a small brand, how much control maybe do you have over, what goes on outside of your purview? It's really challenging. And so again, we say with a lot of empathy for these small brands, you have so many things on your plate, but this needs to be one of them. You need to stay on top of it. The global supply chain is not something you can control, but it's something that can cost you a whole lot of money if you're not sort of managing it. So,
Great insight. Great insight. Krista, any thoughts on that?
Well, I just wanted to ask one thing about the first part of what you said on your first point is, the participation. What would you say is maybe the minimum, I guess, of participation with marketing spend, free fill, because I think when a new brand comes in, they want to give it their best. They don't know where the line is of maybe they can do a little bit here, but maybe not all of the whole ask, right? So what would you say is, a safe place to be in that?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking by the retailers, as far as free fills are concerned, I mean, it depends on the retailer and your strategy, go-to-market strategy. You're not gonna, I would say, have a plan in place for what retailers you want to target to begin with, and follow that plan. Don't stray too far from that. It's hard when you get maybe a Stop and Shop reaches out to you to launch your product. Like, is that your go-to-market strategy when you're an all-natural product and you really want to be targeting a Wegmans or a Whole Foods or you want to be really careful about the way that you go to market. And I would just say that if you are going to be spending on those free fills, you want to make sure you're just going the right direction at the right time. And if we're talking distributors and the marketing that they require, which they do require, they want you to do OIs and they want you to do circulars or flyers or some of their marketing programs. You do have to rub their back a little bit and do some of that. But as a new brand, if you're being smart and you're just launching in one region or one other, it doesn't have to be that super expensive. I mean, you want to do their lowest level of ad contract, right? They're to get in there the cheapest and say that you're a partner, and you're going to do a couple of OIs to keep them happy. But if you've got the right customer that's forcing you into these distributors, maybe it's Albertsons for KeHE and Whole Foods for UNFI. You've got a little bit more leverage where you don't necessarily need to be spending that money. You don't necessarily need to agree to doing quarterly OIs and and a couple circulars every year. If you've got Whole Foods, that's going to be kind of pushing your growth through there. So, so you kind of have to hope. I mean, you want to get your leverage before you go into these distributors, if possible, so you can avoid.
Yeah, that's a great. I wanted to bring that up. That's a great point. Get the retailer and then go to the distributor. Don't go to the distributor first without any, with any retailer commitment, because they're just going to tell you, right, Greg? Well, when you get a retailer commitment, then we'll put you in. They're not going to buy your product and slot it and then hope that some retailer, pulls it out of the DC.
Unless you pay your way to do that. If you can spend a whole ton of money, which none of us can anymore, if you've got huge backing, then you can get in without any retailer support. But but you have to commit to a whole lot, and you don't want to be put in that situation. It's not a winning proposition for anybody. So, not even the distributor.
Right. Krista, you agree with that?
Yeah, this is so good, you guys. This is so good. You're giving all the intel. I love it.
Yeah, well, that's the purpose. Anything else?
Just wait for the repercussions that I.
It's okay. You don't work through anything.
No, I think this has been really helpful for our small emerging brand audience, and you guys have been, really, really insightful. So guys, tell our audience how they can reach you guys. What's the best way to get in touch?
Well, for me, you can go on LinkedIn and find me on there, Greg Esslinger. Follow my posts. I do a bunch of deduction posts at least once or twice a week. I put one on there. Or you can email me at greg@tryfloret.com.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, first of all, want to echo what Greg said. The LinkedIn posts are fantastic. They really give a lot of insight into how distributor deductions actually work. In terms of reaching out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn, Tanay Katari, and then also reach out to Tanay at tryfloret.com, or go to www.tryfloret.com to learn more about what we do to help brands with their distributor deductions.
And Krista, how do we find you?
LinkedIn also, and I'm an avid Instagrammer, so KristaAnderson.co, or my company healthyonthego.co. Awesome.
Thanks, guys, so much. And I would encourage our audience to listen to this podcast once we post it on our LinkedIn page. We're also can be found on iTunes, Spotify, and then also our YouTube channel. So you can find us anywhere that you listen to your podcast. And thanks again, guys, for joining us today. Thank you, Krista, for being our guest host today. And I hope our audience really found this insightful. I think they will, and I know that I did as well. So thanks, everybody, and we will be back at you soon.